Once upon a time, there was a young man who was very good at wanting things. His name was Dax, and wanting was not a passive condition in him. It was a physical force. The way hunger is physical, the way thirst is physical, the way a fire is not merely the absence of cold, but an active and consuming presence that reorganizes everything around it. He had been this way since childhood. His father had called it appetite, which was not quite a compliment and not quite a condemnation. The way fathers name things in their sons they recognize from themselves. He lived in a territory called the Overland, which was broad and dry and full of the kind of people who had made their peace with ordinary lives. Farmers, traders, men who woke early and slept hard and measured their worth in harvests and honest dealings, and children who grew up straight. His father was one of these. His older brother was becoming one. Dax looked at all of it and felt, from the time he was old enough to feel anything clearly, that it was not enough. Not enough sky, not enough gold, not enough of whatever it was that lay beyond the flat horizon that the Overland pressed against on every side like a frame around a painting that wasn't worth the frame. He had heard about the city underground since he was 7 years old. The map came to him at 19, which felt like destiny, and was probably just timing, the way most things that feel like destiny are, on closer inspection, just timing, dressed in better clothes. A trader passing through his father's land had it tucked inside a leather case that he was, he claimed, willing to part with for the right price. The map was old, the paper soft with handling, the ink faded to brown at the edges, and it showed in precise and loving detail the location of a subterranean city called Aurum Profundis, the deep gold. A city built entirely of the stuff, according to the legend the trader recited with practiced enthusiasm. Streets of it, buildings of it, entire cathedrals of compressed and ancient gold that had been forming underground for 1,000 years while the surface world scratched at dirt and called it living. Dax had stood looking at the map for 40 seconds and made his decision. He went to his father that evening. The old man was sitting on the porch in the last light, the way he did every evening, watching the flat horizon the way men watch things they have learned to love by watching them long enough. "I want my portion," Dax said, "my inheritance, now, before it's time." His father was quiet for a long moment. The light went gold and then orange, and then the color that has no name between orange and dark. "You know what you're asking," his father said. It was not a question. "I know what I'm asking." His father looked at him with eyes that held something Dax did not have the equipment to read at 19. Something that was grief and love pressed together so long they had become a single thing. He did not argue. He did not rage. He stood up slowly and went inside and came back with the deed papers and the sum in coin that represented Dax's share of everything the old man had built across 40 years of early mornings and hard dealings and harvests measured one by one. He put it in Dax's hands without a word. Dax felt the weight of it and felt something that might have been gratitude if he had let it be, but he was already thinking about the map, already calculating provisions and equipment, and the location of the first descent point marked in faded brown ink, and the feeling passed before he could name it. He left the next morning before his brother was awake. He did not look back at the house, which was not because he didn't care, but because he knew that if he looked back he might hesitate, and hesitation was the enemy of appetite. The descent took 3 days. He had hired a crew, 6 men, experienced underground, the kind who didn't ask questions about maps or origins or what exactly they were looking for. And they went down through a fissure in the Overland's eastern rock shelf, down through limestone and clay and ancient seams of mineral deposit, down past the places where even experienced underground men got quiet and crossed themselves, down into the deep dark where the temperature changed and the air tasted of metal and the lamps threw light that seemed to move differently than light above ground, as though the dark down here was denser and light had to push harder to exist in it. On the 3rd day they found it. Dax came through a low passage and stood up, and the city opened before him, and he understood, for the first time in his life, what it felt like to be completely right about something. Aurum Profundis was real. It was vast, larger than the map had suggested, because maps are flat and the city had height, tier upon tier of structures rising from a cavern floor to a ceiling so far above that it was invisible in the dark, each tier connected by staircases of solid gold that caught the lamplight and threw it back, multiplied so that the whole space glittered with a light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The streets were narrow and winding and paved with flat gold stones worn smooth by, what? Time. Nothing else had ever walked them. The buildings had doors and windows and the suggestion of rooms inside, and the rooms had furniture, and the furniture was gold, and all of it was ancient and still and waiting with the patience of things that have been waiting so long they have forgotten they are waiting. Dax stood in the main street of Aurum Profundis and spread his arms wide and laughed out loud, and the sound bounced off gold walls and came back to him multiplied, his own joy reflected and amplified until it filled the cavern like something sacred. He paid the crew and sent them back up. He stayed. He stayed for 3 years. In the beginning, it was everything he had imagined, which is the most dangerous kind of beginning because it gives you no reason to be cautious. He filled room after room of the golden buildings with provisions hauled down from the surface, food, wine, lamp oil, the various comforts of a man who has decided to live well. He traded gold from the city's inexhaustible supply for anything he wanted, sending runners to the surface with nuggets and receiving back whatever he asked for. He invited people, first the crew, then others they knew, then others those people knew, an Aurum Profundis, which had been empty and still and patient for 1,000 years, filled with noise and light and the particular chaos of people who have been given access to unlimited gold and no reason for restraint. Dax presided over all of it. He sat at the head of long golden tables and ate and drank and laughed and spent and was celebrated by people whose names he often couldn't remember in the morning, and the gold was always there, always more of it, and he was always the man who had found it, which felt like the best possible version of himself. He did not think about the overland. He did not think about his father on the porch. He did not think about his brother, methodical and unremarkable, working the harvest in the flat morning light. He thought about gold, and about what to do with it, and about tomorrow's pleasures, and that was enough. For 2 years it was enough. The first coin dissolved on a Tuesday. He had picked it up from the street, a flat gold stone, palm-sized, the kind that paved every surface of the city, and it had gone soft in his hand the way hot wax goes soft, and then softer, and then it had come apart between his fingers in a grey powder that was not gold-coloured at all. He stood looking at his palm, at the grey dust, and felt the first cold thing he had felt since the descent. He told no one. He found another stone. It held. He told himself it was an anomaly, old gold, stressed by something structural, nothing significant. The next week it happened again, then 3 times the following week, then daily. The crew he'd kept on began to notice. A staircase railing that had been solid the day before was soft and flaking. A wall that should have been immovable had developed a texture like wet clay, and when you pressed your thumb into it, the indentation stayed, and the material that came away on your skin was that same grey dust that was not gold-coloured at all. By the 3rd year, the dissolution had spread through 1/3 of the city. Rooms that had been solid were hollow. Streets that had been smooth were crumbling underfoot. The people who had come down to live well were leaving, quietly at first, and then with increasing urgency, going back up the way they had come. And Dax watched them go and told himself they were weak. They were afraid of nothing. The city was fine. The gold was fine. He had found it, and it was real, and it would hold. He was alone in Aurum Profundis when the great cathedral at the city's centre, the highest structure, the one that had first caught his lamplight on the day of arrival and thrown it back so magnificently, came down. Not explosively, not dramatically. It simply softened the way everything was softening, and then it settled, and then it was a grey mound where a cathedral had been, and the dust of it drifted through the cavern air and settled on Dax's hair and his hands and his shoulders, and he stood in the middle of the street and looked at it, and could not pretend any more. He sat down in the dissolving street of the dissolving city and put his face in his hands, which were grey with gold dust that was no longer gold, and he thought about his father. He thought about the porch and the last light and the deed papers placed in his hands without a word, and for the first time since he was 19 he felt the full weight of what that had cost the old man, and what he had done with it, the last lamp guttered. In the dark, the dissolution continued quietly around him. He got up. The ascent took 4 days, because he was alone, and because he had not eaten properly in weeks, and because the passage that had taken 3 days going down seemed to have grown longer and darker in the intervening years, which was not possible and felt completely accurate. He came out of the fissure on a grey morning, blinking in light that felt violent after so long below, and he lay on the surface rock for a long time, just breathing air that did not taste of metal. His hands were grey, his clothes were grey. He had nothing, no gold, because gold dissolved, no provisions, because he had eaten the last of them on the 3rd day of climbing. He had the map still in his coat pocket, which was now a document describing the location of an enormous pile of grey dust 200 feet underground. He thought about what he would do. He had run through this in the dark during the ascent. He would find work somewhere, not the overland. Somewhere no one knew his face. Somewhere he could be anonymous and ordinary, and not have to see in anyone's eyes the knowledge of what he had done and what had happened to it. He would rebuild slowly and quietly, and he would never speak of the city, and eventually the whole thing would recede into the past, and he would be a different man with a different history. This was the plan. His feet, without consulting the plan, turned west. He walked for 2 days. He was recognized once by a trader who had done business with his father, and the look on the man's face, a complicated look that contained recognition and surprise and something uncomfortably close to pity, was the hardest thing Dax had endured since the cathedral came down. He came over the last rise and saw his father's land below him in the afternoon light, and stopped. The house was the same. The fields were the same. More of them, actually, his brother had clearly been working. Smoke from the chimney, a horse in the yard, everything exactly as he had left it, except that 3 years had passed and he had left it with his father's inheritance in his hands, and he was returning with grey dust on his coat and nothing else. He almost turned around. He was still considering it, the specific, practiced cowardice of a man who would rather disappear than face what his disappearing cost, when he saw the figure come out of the house, his father, moving faster than a man his age should move across uneven ground, which meant he had seen Dax from the window before Dax had seen him, which meant he had been watching, which meant the old man reached him before Dax had finished processing the implications, and his arms went around his son with a force that had nothing measured or reserved about it, not the careful embrace of a man who has been wounded and is being cautious with his wounds, but the full, unguarded grip of someone who has been waiting and has now stopped waiting, and the waiting is simply over. Dax stood with his arms at his sides for a moment, his grey hands, his grey coat, the map in his pocket that led to dust. "I spent it," he said into his father's shoulder. His voice came out broken in a way that surprised him. "All of it. The city, it dissolved. Everything dissolved. I have nothing. I came back with nothing. I'm not—" He stopped, started again. "I'm not asking to be a son. I'll work. Whatever you need, I'll work for it." His father pulled back and held him by the shoulders and looked at him the way he had looked at the horizon every evening, with the focused attention of someone who has learned to love a thing by watching it long enough through every kind of light. "You were dead," he said. and you are alive. He said it simply, the way you say things that are simply true. That is the only accounting that matters to me today. From the field, at a distance, Dax saw his brother stop working and look toward them. He could not read his brother's expression from here. That, he understood, would be its own reckoning, and it would not be simple, and it would take time. But his father's hands were on his shoulders in the afternoon light of the overland, and the ground under his feet was solid, and the air did not taste of metal, and Dax was alive and home. And these were not small things. They were, in fact, the only things. He had gone underground looking for gold and had come back with something that could not dissolve. He just hadn't known that was what he was looking for. And he arose and came to his father. But when he was yet a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion, and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. Luke 15, verse 20. For the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. Romans 6, verse 23.